says live, stop share. I'm using a computer. Let me go back out. I'm going to stop sharing and see if that helps.
Саш, скажи что-нибудь, я хочу понять, насколько тебя плохо слышно.
Got it. I stopped sharing and then I can see the interpretation button. I have now clicked it to English.
Саша, что ты нас слышишь? Саша.
So what I learned is if you're sharing your screen, you cannot see that interpret button at the bottom of the screen. You have to stop sharing, get into the normal video mode, and then you can see the English interpretation button. Right.
Коллеги, подскажите, вы меня нормально слышите?
Саш, я тебя нормально слышу.
Отлично вас слышу.
Все, отлично. Тогда, в принципе, мы готовы начинать. Andrew, are you ready? Andrew, are you ready to start?
Yes, I am.
Okay, perfect. Then I will introduce you to the audience. You're being broadcasted to different audiences in Russia, so there's a lot of viewers, and I will introduce you in Russian so that they would know more about you.
Okay.
And then I will pass the word to you. You will have around 45 to 50 minutes for your lecture, and then we will have 10 minutes for questions and answers from the audience. I guess that's basically it.
Sounds good.
I will move
Ready
to. Yep, I will move to the Russian channel, introduce you, and I will let you know when it's time to speak. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you.
Итак, коллеги, добрый день. Сегодня с нами профессор Эндрю Ваншак. Это старший преподаватель кафедры развития организации человека университета Вандербильта. Исследования доктора Ваншака сосредоточены на прогнозировании будущего технологий, а также на разработке и распространении эффективных и доступных обучающих технологий. Сегодня он представит вам свою лекцию, и после этого вы сможете задать вопросы, на которые он ответит. Пожалуйста, пишите свои вопросы в чат, мы обязательно их зададим профессору. Пожалуйста, теперь наслаждайтесь лекцией. Andrew, please.
Thank you very much, Alex, for that introduction. Today, I have a little bit of time to share with you what it is that I teach my undergraduate and graduate students at Vanderbilt University about technology forecasting. I will describe 4 common methods for forecasting technologies in the future, and then I would like to share with you some brief remarks about my experiences teaching technology forecasting at the very end. I look forward to your questions. One of the exciting things about technology forecasting is that you're always working with cutting edge technologies, things that are just about to appear or will appear soon. Things like robots and robotics. We have now robots that can jump, do gymnastics. We have 4-legged robots that can be used to work with humans, sometimes in dangerous situations. Robotic technology is advancing very quickly, as we all know. Those robots also don't have to look like humans. We have autonomous vehicles, cars that can drive themselves. Here's an example of a truck that can drive itself. Those autonomous vehicles may also fly. This is called an eVTOL, eVTOL aircraft, which stands for Electronic Vertical Takeoff and Landing. You will see many, many aircraft like this in the future. Just about every aircraft manufacturing company in the world is producing these types of aircrafts as experiments, but very soon they will take you from the city center to the airport, where you'll take a conventional aircraft to other parts of your country or around the world. Virtual and augmented reality headsets, like the Oculus Rift on the left and the Magic Leap on the right, are somewhat common now. They're kind of like toys. They're fun to play with. They're making their way into education and training. And the technology is becoming more and more advanced to the point where very soon, 5 years, you'll have a pair of glasses that could project an image onto the back of your eyeball. And it would match that image with the world around you. That's called augmented reality. Several companies are working on brain-computer interfaces, microprocessors that connect directly to your brain. Elon Musk has a company called Neuralink, where he's demonstrated 10,000 leads, little wires that can go into the brain. These will be used to help people regain vision that was lost, hearing, but also to be able to perform different cognitive functions like mathematics or language. Synthetic biology is very exciting, sometimes called genetic engineering. It's the way that we can take DNA, the building block or the code that controls our cells and allows them to reproduce and produce different functions in our body. We can use these technologies and sequencing to recombine pieces of DNA to make new types of food or fuel or drugs. Synthetic food in the United States, we have what's called Beyond Meat. It's pretty tasty. You can purchase a hamburger that's made entirely from vegetable components. Something called Huel, which is like human fuel. That's sort of a powdered drink. And then there's even synthetic alcohol, synthetic vodka, synthetic wine, things that are produced in laboratories without the normal processes of nature. When we can slice up DNA and recombine it in the ways that we want, we can use it to help to improve human beings. This is, of course, something that has a concern for many people regarding ethics. Obviously, you want to reduce the types of disease or disorders that sometimes people are born with, like diabetes. But as long as you're changing DNA, some people may think, why not make the person taller? Why not make their vision better? Why not increase their IQ? That's something that's beginning to happen now. You may have seen videos of reusable rockets. Again, Elon Musk, with his company called SpaceX in the United States, is able to launch satellites into orbit and then to bring back the majority of the rocket to land on Earth, to be refueled, and to be used again. And the significance of this is it becomes very inexpensive to put more and more satellites and human beings into orbit. And a project that's associated with it is called Starlink. In fact, I just recently, in my home, got a satellite dish that will allow me to access the internet from anywhere on the planet, except maybe the North Pole, as you can see in that picture there, with very, very high speed and what's called low latency, a very fast internet connection. And this will be available to anybody, anywhere on the planet, even in the most remote areas. Putting microprocessors, computers into everything, light switches, elevators, aircraft. Of course, we have them in our phones. We have them in our homes. We have them in our cars. And if those can connect and communicate with each other, we have what's called the Internet of Things, devices connecting to themselves without human beings having to be involved. blockchain technology is a type of what's called a distributed ledger. That just means that individuals can make transactions with each other without having to go through a trusted party like a bank or the government. You can pay somebody, you can receive money from somebody in any currency that you want. That's called, one example is called Bitcoin, but blockchain can be used for many things. New forms of energy, you may be familiar with green energy like wind power, nuclear power, solar power, hydropower from waterfalls, many types of energy productions that are very renewable that do not increase greenhouse gases. All of that energy is required to run the Internet of Things. For all of those electric vehicles, whether they be cars, trucks, aircraft, requires more and more energy. And we have more advanced ways of producing that energy. And finally, robots, but not just robots like I showed before, but robots with artificial intelligence. This is the type of technology that I think is going to change the world. Having computers that are as smart as humans at just about everything humans can do. Right now, my cell phone is smarter than me at playing chess, at performing calculations, even translating languages. But soon, more and more of what we consider to be uniquely human intellectual activities will be taken over by computers. And the images I show you here are from American television programs like Lost in Space. That robot was cleverly called Robot. 1967, 10 years later, Star Wars was in the movie theaters. This is C-3PO. 10 years later, this is Data, a character from a new version of Star Trek. And then 30 years later, here's a character from a TV show called Westworld. And as you can see, over those years, the representation of what a robot is becomes increasingly more human as our capability of producing robots becomes more sophisticated. But underneath every one of these robots is intelligence. Your president, Vladimir Putin, said, "Artificial intelligence is the future, not only of Russia, but of all mankind." There are huge opportunities, but also threats that are difficult to foresee today. And what I'd like to highlight are those last few words that are difficult to foresee today. This is what we're going to talk about. How can you foresee the opportunities? How can you foresee the threats, the risks, and how can we avoid them? So perhaps with some of the things that I talked to you about today and your own research, you can support your president in finding ways of foreseeing the future so that we realize the benefits without suffering the negative effects. So the first thing that's important to do is to define success in technology forecasting. What does it mean to be good at seeing the future of technology? Here's a conversation you might experience. One person says, "How can a decision maker know whether a forecast is a good one?" His friend responds, "Whether or not it comes true, obviously." And he says, "Let me clarify. How can a decision maker know whether a forecast is a good one before the outcome is known?" So you will be making forecasts. You will be training and teaching students and others how to make forecasts, but you don't want to wait 5 years or 10 years to find out whether or not you're right. How can you know that a forecast is good when you produce it, before the future comes? And the definition of success is its utility for decision-making purposes. How useful is a forecast to help somebody like Vladimir Putin to make a decision? Is to help the decision maker to reach a better decision than they would have been possible otherwise. So if they have to make a decision on their own, maybe it's good, maybe it's not so good. But if you present them a forecast, a picture of the future, hopefully that information will help them to make a better forecast, a better decision than they would have without the forecast. And again, how do we know in advance that that is useful? By providing the decision makers reason to be confident in the assumptions, the data, and the processes. So we want to make sure that we have ways of forecasting the future, that in that forecast we can say, these are our assumptions. This is the data that we used. These are the methods we use to analyze the data, and therefore this is our conclusion. And if we do those three things in a very credible fashion, then the decision maker says, you know, I'm going to believe you. And they will use that information to make decisions moving forward. So what's very important in technology forecasting is that you have methods that allow you to make transparent, to make obvious the assumptions, the data, and the processes. And what I like to do today is to present to you very, very quickly. This is an overview of material that I typically take 5 months to present to students. And I think we have about 20 minutes. So this is very, very fast. It's a very brief introduction to 4 methods for forecasting technology. Porter and Rossini, some researchers, suggested that the hundreds of forecasting techniques fall into 5 basic families. There are many, many ways to forecast, but generally they are monitoring, expert opinion, trend extrapolation, modeling, and scenarios. Now I took these and I combined 2 of them. When I teach technology forecasting, I just cover monitoring, expert opinion using something called the Delphi Method, trend extrapolation, and scenario development. So I combine modeling with trend extrapolation. I will give you a quick example of that in just a few moments. These are the 4 big methods that are commonly used. They're a combination of quantitative approaches that involve numbers and qualitative approaches that involve lots of words and stories and larger ideas. The first method, monitoring. Here's a great quote by a science fiction author named William Gibson. He said, "The future is already here, it's just not very evenly distributed." Which means of all the things that I talked about before, robots and reusable rockets and autonomous vehicles and genetic engineering, all of those things are the future, but they exist today in their very, very early stages. Any technology that you're interested in that's going to come in 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years, some parts of that exist today. You just need to know where to look. One challenge of monitoring is what we call in the United States, drinking from a fire hose. Just too much information comes all at once, and that's the internet. So much information. But a paradox, it's kind of interesting, is the other challenge is finding a needle in a haystack, right? One small little needle in a very large haystack. I want that piece of information, but there's so much information. So the real trick with monitoring is, how do I take all of the information available to me and figure out exactly where to look for the information that I'm most interested in? And so the approach that I suggest is recognizing that technology goes through stages of development. First, there is scientific discovery. Somebody discovers gravity, somebody discovers gold, somebody discovers magnetism, somebody discovers fusion. Then they take that basic scientific discovery, whether it be physics or chemistry or biology or electronics, and they develop some sort of a product in the laboratory. And it looks kind of crazy, and it kind of only works a little bit, but there's something there. Then they move forward and spend more dollars, and more people work on it, and they develop a prototype, something that can actually do something somewhat useful. Then with more dollars and more time and more engineering, and sometimes now business people involved, they can create a operating product that can be sold to other people for them to use. Then there's widespread commercial use. Everybody has one, or many people do, like today, automobiles and telephones. And then that same technology, like a laser, not just used for maybe burning something, but maybe used for telecommunication or sending messages to somebody, or to create images on a screen. That initial invention of something like a laser is not just used for the original idea, but it's used for many different ideas. It's diffused to other areas. And then finally, once it's being used by many people in many different ways, economists can look at the social and economic impact. So these are stages of technological development, from basic science all the way through to everyday life. Now, monitoring is, I want to find out information about a very new technology. Where do I look? Well, where does the information first appear? Initially, funding agencies, this could be the government, or this could be business, says there's some invention that we would like. There's some product. We need people to work on it. We'll give you money to do some scientific research. Then you can look at what research and development labs are creating. This could be, again, corporate. This could be at a university. This could be the government. These could be private individuals. You could look at their labs and see what they're working on. Oftentimes, they want to announce to the world that they've discovered something, so they do it at a scientific conference. And so they have conference proceedings. These are journal articles that appear. Sometimes government organizations sponsor competitions for many people to work on something. For instance, electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. There is a prize now, and many millions of dollars will be given to people who produce the best version of that device. Then more articles appear in more mainstream, common academic journals. Companies get patents to protect their inventions, and so we can look at the patent database for new ideas. And then finally, once the products are in the market, we can look at industry white papers, or we can look at the media like the internet. And so I think what's important for you to understand is the stage of technological development is matched by the location where the information appears. So as you think about the stage of development of robots, or the stage of development of genetic engineering, or of some new technology that's just beginning, where would I find information in the world about it? Look at the places that I've described here. So the key concepts of monitoring are future technologies exist in some form today. The stage of technology provides a clue about relevant information. You can leverage other researchers, people who are monitoring technology, and see what they've discovered. And finally, monitoring forms the foundation for the other forecasting methods I'm going to describe. So monitoring is simple, it's easy, it's what most people do when they think about trying to discover what the future holds. The second approach is called the Delphi Method. James Surowiecki is the author of a book called The Wisdom of Crowds. He said, paradoxically, the best way for a group to be smart is for each person in it to think and act as independently as possible. So he's trying to find ways of collecting the wisdom of many people, but reducing the biases that can influence incorrectly what their ideas are. So we need expert opinion. Monitoring is an effective strategy for gathering information. It's how you can develop expertise in an area. But experts are simply people who did it before you and have spent a longer time doing it. So you could be an expert. There are people who have done it longer than you, though. Experts can answer your specific questions, and multiple experts are even better. Group knowledge can be superior to individual knowledge. In the English, we say 2 heads are better than 1. There are problems with expert opinion, unfortunately. Who's an expert? Just because they say they are? Experts can be wrong and oftentimes are wrong. Experts often disagree among themselves. I hear one expert say one thing and another expert say something different. Who can I believe? Experts are often biased because we're human beings. Of course we're biased. And a group of experts has even more biases than the individuals within it. So they're biases that we as individuals bring to a meeting, and then when we get together, the psychology of groups creates even more biases. So back in the 1950s and the 1960s, there was a company called RAND, which is short for Research and Development. They created something called Project Delphi. The Delphi method was devised in order to obtain the most reliable consensus of a group of experts by subjecting them to a series of questionnaires in depth, interspersed with controlled opinion feedback. That's a lot of ideas in a very long sentence. So I'll explain to you the Delphi method. There's 4 rounds. In the first round, the moderator, this could be you, identifies a theme, maybe it's artificial intelligence, and recruits experts, somebody that knows more about the topic than they do. The experts are asked to identify events associated with the theme. When will we have computers that are as smart as one person? When will we have a computer as smart as all human beings? They identify events and will then in a moment put a date on them. The moderator consolidates the events because there are many duplicates. Sometimes events maybe are a little bit crazy, so we throw them out, put them into a small list, and then send them back out to the experts. Then the experts forecast a date for each event. So maybe there's 10 things that the moderator says, in what year will the following happen? And each expert individually and anonymously, with no one else knowing, estimates a date for each of the events. The moderator runs statistics. What is the average date, for example, and sends that back to the experts. The experts can update their estimate. Maybe they think, wow, maybe I was too late with my estimate, or I was too early with my estimate. But if they want to stay with their estimate and their estimate is out near the edge, then they need to explain themselves. Why is your date so far into the future? Or why is your date so close to the present? The moderator runs statistics again and sends them out with the explanations from the people who are the outliers in round 3. And then the experts can update their estimates again with that new information, and they can explain themselves again if they're an outlier. But if you run through this program through many rounds like this, at the end, there's a convergence. The estimates get closer and closer together, and you have the best estimate from that group of experts, while reducing many of the biases. So one example is a Delphi forecast for artificial intelligence. And this is what they found. Experts expect that between the year 2040 and 2050, not too far from now, high-level machine intelligence, that means computers as smart as humans, will be more likely than not. What this means right here, 50% confident that in the year 2040, we'll have very, very smart computers. This is what the experts finally concluded at the end of the 4-round Delphi process. So the key concepts in the Delphi method are: collect information from a panel of experts by using anonymous questionnaires. Provide feedback with statistical analysis. Iterate through multiple rounds. So the Delphi method is good when we're trying to forecast something for which there is not much historical data. It's some technology that's so new that we don't have any trends that we can base them on, or in situations where human factors like economics or politics or legal issues could influence the advancement of technology. The third method is called Transpalation. This is Jim Barksdale, who's the former CEO of Netscape, which was one of the very first internet companies like Google, but before them. He said, if we have data, let's go with that. If all we have are opinions, let's go with mine. And doesn't that sound like something the CEO of a company would say? But what you want is not to have to rely upon the CEO. What you want is to provide that CEO and the other decision makers with the data. So trend extrapolation started originally by the observation that animals grow over time. And here's a cow on a scale, and he's being weighed. And if you look at a cow when it's very young, this is how much it weighs in kilograms, and over a number of weeks, it then increases in its weight. And you can actually look at that and create an equation that estimates the general form of the growth of a cow. In fact, here is a universal growth curve for many types of animals. And what we see is, over the lifespan of an animal, from 0 to 100% of the average lifespan of that animal, it grows from 0 weight to the maximum weight. And this is what many, many animals look like. And what's interesting about this is for the growth of animals, but for many other phenomena, we find that there are universal mathematical functions that can be used to model them and to predict them. So this is called a logarithmic increase, this particular graph. Here's an example of the speed of a Porsche car as it drives through first gear, second gear, third gear, fourth gear, fifth gear, sixth gear. Can we make a prediction of how fast this car would go if there was a 7th gear? Sure, we extrapolate this data, and I would predict that a Porsche that had a 7th gear could travel at 250 miles an hour, but it would take 60 seconds to go that fast. Now that's a very, very simple model, very simple projection. This is an exponential increase. We notice that solar power, what's called photovoltaic cells, the amount of solar power that's being produced around the globe is increasing at an exponential rate. I can make predictions about 2016 or 2017 or 2018 if I just follow this curve. One thing about exponential functions is we can convert them from a standard scale, which goes from 200,000, 400, 600, 800 to a million, a logarithmic scale. We keep the years constant, but what happens is an exponential function becomes straight. And this allows us to make predictions about the future, what's out here, much easier than this. We'd have to just go up and up and up and up and up on the screen, and it would make it very difficult. So this is a transformation from a exponential function producing a linear function. And this is one of the most classic examples of exponential growth. It's called Moore's law. And Gordon Moore, who worked at Intel, said, the number of transistors in an integrated circuit doubles approximately every 2 years. This has been true from 1970 all the way up to 2020. And look how beautifully straight this line is on an exponential or a logarithmic graph. So that's an example of exponential growth. Exponential decrease is the price of silicon photovoltaic cells. As we produce more of them, the price comes down. Many graphs or things that we want to forecast in the future take on what's called an S curve, because this looks like the letter S. For example, propeller-driven aircraft speed. Way back in the early 1900s, the Wright brothers had an airplane and it flew maybe 20 miles an hour. You can do the conversion into kilometers per hour, but aircraft got faster and faster and faster through World War II. But that's about as fast as they got. There was a limit to propeller-driven aircraft speed. It has to do with the tip of the propeller. As it spins through the air, it gets close to the speed of sound, and the aircraft can't go any further. And that's why jet aircraft engines were developed. They were a breakthrough technology. They allowed aircraft to break through this barrier. And barriers can come from many things: physical or chemical properties, social factors, resource constraints, legal restrictions or requirements. What I think is interesting is that we can look at a sequence of S curves. Canals were used back in the 1800s to move goods, and still are today. And these were all the canals that were built, from 0 canals to 100% of all canals built. It follows an S curve of sorts. 55 years later, in the mid 1800s, railways and trains were built, and they followed an S curve in terms of the amount of track that was produced. Then about 55 years later, automobiles were produced. And then beginning in the 1940s and 1950s, aircraft, runways were being built. And we're going to see the exact same growth here. But what I think is interesting is what's next? What is that next technology that will be used beyond canals, railways, roads, and airways? It's something that exists today. It's here. What is it? I think it's, did I say Elon Musk again? He's a great inventor. Reusable rockets, and this is a rocket that he's going to be testing very soon. And it can carry 100 passengers to any place on the globe in less than 1 hour. And when he produces 10 of these rockets, 100 of these rockets, or 1,000 of these rockets, I think we're going to see a growth curve that looks like this. Maybe you have a different idea about what that technology is. If we can create mathematical models, we can use those models to predict things like climate change or even modeling pandemics. And so that's how trend forecasting can move into modeling. Key concepts of trend extrapolation are trends often continue into the future, but the key is to determine the underlying forces. Why is it a logarithmic or exponential, or is it linear, or is it an S curve? What's happening underneath that can allow us to determine the correct mathematical function? Because we don't just want to find the best fit curve. Just put up 3 dots and then draw a straight line through it. We want to determine whether or not the curve goes like this or like that. You can use trend characterization for modeling. And you have to be careful to consider the impact of external factors that alter trends, like human factors, legal issues, political issues, ethical issues, and social issues. Those can influence the rate of new technology adoption. The fourth and final method for technology forecasting I'd like to share with you is called scenario development. Seneca, who lived 2,000 years ago or a little more, said, "Whoever does not know how to take care of the future in the present will depend upon the uncertainties of that very future." That means we need to think ahead. We need to prepare. Like the quote by the President Vladimir Putin, "It's difficult to foresee the future, but we need to begin today because it takes time to prepare." How will we do it? The fourth method is called scenario development. There's 5 steps, and I'll go through them very briefly. The first is to consider external factors, social factors, technological factors, economic factors. And you think about how impactful they will be in the future on the technology you care about, but how uncertain we are about what will happen. And then if we multiply these 2 numbers, we can identify 2 factors, in this case, technological factors and legal factors, that we're going to move into step 2. Step 2 is called scenario creation. We would put technological factors here. We'd say poor technology or advanced technology. And then we would have, what was it, legal? Legal factors here, maybe unrestricted use of technology or very restricted use. So if it was autonomous vehicles, maybe they're illegal only for certain people to have, or it's legal for everybody. Maybe the technology is so-so, maybe it kind of helps you to steer the car down the road, or maybe it's very advanced, there doesn't have to be a human in the car. So when we have 2 factors, each with 2 levels, it creates 4 possible futures. Scenario 1, 2, 3, and 4. Your job as a forecaster is to choose one of those scenarios that you'll move forward with. Maybe it's the one that's most likely. Maybe it's the one that's most dangerous. Maybe it's the one that nobody's thinking about. Then you do what's called a SWOT analysis. That stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This is a very common process, often taught in business schools. And you think about the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities of threats of your organization in that future with this technology. From that information, you look at the strengths and weaknesses, and you match them to threats and opportunities to determine what are your priorities? What are some attractive opportunities? What are some things that are very risky? That's called a strategy matrix. And from that strategy matrix, we can develop an action plan. We can present to a decision maker a prioritized list of recommendations that a decision maker can use to mitigate risk, reduce risk, and maximize opportunity for the one scenario that we chose. And that's what we said our goal of technology forecasting would be, to help decision makers to make better decisions than they would have without our forecast. When I teach my students in my class how to do scenario forecasting, they can do it in about 1 hour on a blank piece of paper. This is the front and this is the back. And then of course, they have to make it look professional and they turn it into a formal report. And these are the kinds of papers that my students submit to me. So the key concepts of scenario development are, scenarios are stories about possible futures, 4 possible futures that are very different from each other. They build upon information collected using other forecasting methods. You can use information from monitoring, from Delphi, from trend extrapolation, and use that information to create these scenarios. They're developed based upon interactions of uncertain external factors. Those external factors like legal issues or political issues or ecological issues or ethical issues. And we look at the interaction between those to create those 4 possible futures. And it's a multi-step process. I told you about the 5 steps, but the nice thing about it is it's transparent. That means people see what you're doing. Remember at the beginning of my presentation, it's important that your forecast has credibility. People need to know what your assumptions are, your sources of data, and your processes. Well, the scenario approach that I just described to you very quickly talks about the data, the assumptions, and the process, so that the decision makers are involved all the way along, and at the end, they find it credible and then therefore useful. And when it's done well, the process leads to specific actionable recommendations. So instead of Vladimir Putin saying it's difficult to foresee the future, you say it is difficult. But I'm using 4 different methods to evaluate possible futures. And at the end, I have specific recommendations I can provide to you that will reduce the risk, those dangers of artificial intelligence, while maximizing the opportunity. And here's how we did it. So why do we do technology forecasting? Because advancements in technology lead to new types of businesses, and those new businesses need workers with different kinds of skills, new jobs. And those skills are developed through education and training, but a different education than we've received to date, different kinds of training for a new type of future. And people who are educated in new ways about new technologies can then create even more new technologies, and it just continues. This is the benefit of technology forecasting. What will happen? What kinds of jobs will be created? And let's begin today, as you are in this program, learning how to teach people and train them so they become part of it. And hopefully their jobs are not replaced by robots or through artificial intelligence. So Walter Gretzky, this is the father, said to his son, Wayne Gretzky, and maybe we'll enter into an argument about this, but many people think Wayne Gretzky was the greatest hockey player of all time. He said, skate to where the puck is going, not to where it has been, right? So many of you know different types of sports, and your coach said to you, don't chase the ball. Don't chase the hockey puck. You'll get very tired and you'll never catch it. Watch the play develop. Watch where the players are going, and then skate to where you think the puck is going to be, and you might be there at the right place at the right time. And that's what technology forecasting allows us to do. Now, what I'd like to do is transition to just a very brief description of my experiences as a teacher of this topic, and then hopefully there'll be time at the end for questions and answers. So I've been teaching technology forecasting for about 10 years. And I've taught it every semester to undergraduate students and graduate students, both face-to-face and online. And it's been a great experience for me. And every single time I teach it, I learn something new. But what I've learned is the more things change, the more they stay the same. There's always new technologies coming. You know, the record at one time for listening to music was new, and then the CD. And then we have digital music. And even though there's advancements in how music is delivered, and there will be more advancements in the future, we see the same events occur. We see the same S-curve for adoption, for instance, of different game platforms, different types of vehicles, from steam-powered vehicles to internal combustion-powered vehicles to electric vehicles. And the same thing repeats over and over again. We can see patterns. The more things change, the more they stay the same, and we see these patterns. And we, as people who are predicting, focus on a few proven forecasting methods. So the approach to technology forecasting I described today, the 4 methods, are very, very common. You are very safe in teaching these methods. They're very mature. There are many examples of forecasts using all of those different techniques, which means it has greater credibility. If someone wants to say, how are you forecasting the future? You say, I'm using trend extrapolation. How do we know that this works? You say, because it's been used for 50 years. And here's many examples. Keep it simple. Forecasting is like the game of chess. It only takes a few hours to learn the rules, but it takes a lifetime to master. While you work with your students, you don't have many hours. And so the objective is to cover everything sufficient so that they can begin to use the techniques themselves. And hopefully they find them of value, and they can spend many years becoming better and better at doing it. And let students choose their own technologies. In my course on technology forecasting, I don't say to my students, you need to forecast electric vehicles, and you need to forecast quantum computing. Let students choose what they want to forecast, because what I found as a teacher is relevance is critical to engaging students. They have to care about what they're studying. And some students are very interested in robots, and some students don't care. Some students are interested in fashion, and some students don't care about that. But if you let them forecast the things that they care about, you'll find that they pay a lot of attention and they focus on this and work very, very hard. What I've provided to you through the organizers are the syllabus for the graduate level course that I teach. So it describes the homework assignments, it describes the readings, it describes the sequence of things that I teach, and you're welcome to use it in any way that you want. You can copy it, you can paste it, and you don't even have to give me credit. That's for you. I've also given you the template in Microsoft Word that I give my students. And I say, when you produce a forecast for my class, please use this template. And it looks very professional. Their forecasts look like something that could be published in a scientific journal. I've also given you some samples of forecasts my students have created. A Delphi forecast, a trend forecast, a monitoring forecast, and a combined forecast that takes all those different ideas and plugs them in. I think you'll enjoy reading those forecasts and use them as models for your students if you'd like. And then finally, because you're teachers, how do you grade a forecast? I've given you my grading rubric, the guidelines that I use to provide my students with very specific feedback that will help them to make more high quality papers as they move throughout the semester. And again, you can use it, all of it, a little bit of it, or none of it at all. But all of these things are available to you. And what I want to say is, if after this presentation you have questions, certainly I'll answer the questions that come up in chat, but feel free to send me an email. Hopefully your English is much better than my Russian. And if it is, I would be happy to answer any other questions that you have. My name is Andy. My last name is Van Schack. I'm at Vanderbilt University, and this is in the southern eastern United States. So that's what I have to say for now. I know it's a lot of information. I went pretty quickly, so thank you to the translator. But now I'd like to answer any questions that you have.
Dear Andy, thank you so much for your presentation. I will switch to the Russian channel to read the questions, and the translator will translate them for you.
Perfect.
Итак, коллеги, добрый день. Еще раз к нам поступило несколько вопросов для Энди. Первый вопрос. Как вы определяете понятие полного искусственного интеллекта?
Yes, that is a very, very difficult question. And many people who are much smarter than me have a difficult time defining what artificial intelligence. Sometimes the joke is anything we can't quite do yet, we call that artificial intelligence. I think when I describe artificial intelligence and I think about what it means to us in terms of jobs and education, it's the ability for a computer to think, and oftentimes in what we would consider to be creative ways, and solve problems that it was not specifically programmed to solve. So many years ago, there was a computer program called Deep Blue that was programmed to play chess. All the rules were put into it, and many, many positions were put into it. And it solved the game of chess. But now there are computers and new programs where no one teaches it the rules. The computer just watches many, many games, and then it plays itself, and it becomes better and better without any human intervention until finally it's far better than any human can play. And so I think the idea of artificial intelligence, the idea that computers can creatively solve problems they were not programmed to solve, is what I consider to be intelligence. And artificial just means computers are doing it and silicon rather than human beings doing it with neurons.
Огромное спасибо за Так, огромное спасибо за ответы. У нас есть еще несколько вопросов. Следующий вопрос. Какой, по вашему мнению, будет эволюция методов прогнозирования, которые смогут давать более точный результат, нежели те, которые существуют сейчас? Или же существующие методы достаточно хороши и новых уже не нужно?
I think the existing techniques are very effective. And if my primary objective is to produce forecasts today for decision makers, I will use the tools that are currently available. But there are researchers who are looking at more advanced ways of forecasting the future. And that generally involves modeling, taking in lots of data. You may have heard the term big data. And maybe not coincidentally, this is where artificial intelligence comes in. If you feed lots of information into a computer and then show it what has happened over time with those inputs, in the future, it can predict better than humans can, perhaps, what will happen. Even things that rely upon or are influenced by human behavior, by politics and by legal issues or social factors. So I think using computers and artificial intelligence and some of these new algorithms, I think can be useful. But for now, I like the 4 methods that I presented to you today. And those are the techniques that I use, and I expect I will use for the next 5 to 10 years.
Большое спасибо. Еще один вопрос. Используете ли вы игры или симуляции в процессе своей работы с будущим?
I think that simulations is an example of modeling. We can use many different terms to describe the same thing. Games, I think, are very, very effective because what we're doing is creating a model and then we're changing the inputs. So I think the idea of simulations and gaming as a way of predicting and planning for the future is very, very useful. It's just another technique that I think is mature, that I think could be successfully used in your courses. It's just when I chose the 4 to use in my classes, I chose these 4, and there's not enough time for 5. But I bet if I had a little bit more time, gaming and simulation would probably be the one that I would select. So I'm glad you brought it up.
Спасибо. Следующий вопрос. Какой метод лучше всего подходит для прогнозирования развития университета?
If I'm thinking about the development of a university, there are many different things I could forecast. For instance, how many students are enrolled? How many courses are offered? What is the graduation rate of students? For these things, I would probably use trend forecasting, right? I would create mathematical models and then use information from other similar universities and use them as an analogy to make predictions. If I was thinking about the purpose of a university or how the university should change based upon how things are changing in the world, like robotics, artificial intelligence, and their influence on the role of a university, then I would definitely begin using Delphi to collect information from experts and then use the Delphi information to inform my scenario forecasting. I would also do some monitoring because there is a university of the future today on the planet. Which one represents the ideal university of the year 2030? So some monitoring, a little bit of Delphi, some trend, feed it into scenario forecasting, and then have the decision makers at your university work in that 5-step process to make predictions about 4 possible futures. Select one and say, this is what we should do today to prepare for that future. So I guess my answer is I would use all of the methods, but I think scenario forecasting at the end will help to provide those decision makers with good information to make decisions.
Большое спасибо. Еще один вопрос. Скажите, пожалуйста, почему вы не используете TRIZ?
I love that, and I do recognize that it was invented in the former Soviet Union. I do talk to my students about that technique in my class. I teach my students how to invent using, I call it TRIZ, T-R-I-Z. When I discuss monitoring, a way of looking at information to make predictions about the future, we look at patents. And the developer of TRIZ, that method, was a former patent examiner in the Soviet Union. And he discovered that inventions really fall into about 40 different approaches, what he called, or what I call design patterns. So I do use that method for, as a method for inventing. I think it's fantastic. It was really a benefit to everyone around the globe that this technology was developed. But I don't think of it technique really technology forecasting. I think of it as a technique for invention and for creating new versions of technologies. If you have and would be willing to send me an email, information about how to invention to forecasting using that method, I would love to hear it.
Dear Andy, thank you so much for your replies. I guess that's it. We will forward your presentation and we welcome all participants to ask their questions personally if they want. Thank you once again so much for your wonderful presentation today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much and good luck to all of you.
Спасибо большое. Коллеги, как уже отметили несколько человек, что, мне кажется, количество обобщений, с одной стороны, простота изложений, ну, так удивительно для такого рода лекции,